We included in a YouTube short just a couple of days ago that there seemed to be some strains between China and South Korea that are leading to disruptions in air travel between the two countries. It was recently announced that several South Korean airlines plan to halt some of their flights to mainland China over the course of this year, and especially to the country's capital in Beijing. These include carriers like Asiana Airlines, which announced it'll temporarily pause its flights between Gimpo and Beijing beginning on July 6th, as well as its route from Incheon to Shenzhen, which will stop on July 8th. Korean Air, likewise, is said to plan stopping its Gimpo to Beijing route starting on August 1st until at least October 28th, and as well as its Incheon to Shenzhen route between August 9th to October 28th. So, what's behind the freeze? It seems to depend, to some extent, on who you ask. And before we ask that question, I'd like to ask you a question. Will you take half a second to click the subscribe button and notification bell so you can stay up to date when we put out new videos? We can't do it without you, so we'd really appreciate your support. But back to those routes you came here for. On the surface, it has to do with the fact that the number of passengers traveling those routes is still a lot lower than pre-pandemic levels. But although China has lifted restrictions on tourist visas for travelers arriving from some 60 countries, like Thailand or Nepal or Indonesia, it's yet to do so for travelers from the US and its allies, including Korea. Flights did recently resume between several Chinese and Korean cities back in March, and these totaled 56 flights per week, about which the Chinese ambassador to Korea said at the time, he said, quote, "These will create a new dynamic in human resources exchanges and economic cooperation between our two countries." Even so, though, with many restrictions still placed on travel into China for Korean passengers, the routes have not been busy. Statistics from the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, and Transport in Korea show that almost 121 million passengers flew between South Korea and China in the first 3 months of the year, which sounds nice until we compare that figure with the same period in 2019, which saw more than 721 million passengers. Even compared to other nations that still have some heightened restrictions like Japan, South Korean travel to China is still really low. In Japan's case, travel during the same 3 months this year saw 697.25 million passengers. Again, that's directly compared to South Korea's 121 million. So it seems that low passenger counts on these routes and their poor economics for the air carriers flying them are probably the basic reason for the pause. But of course there are diplomatic routes, since a big part of why these routes haven't been successful has to do with travel restrictions that seem to be aimed at the US and its allies. According to an article in China's state-controlled Global Times, quote, "Chinese observers believe that adjustments are due to market factors, which reflect that South Korean airlines have low confidence that there will be any notable increase in terms of passenger loads in the short term, since the incumbent administration of President Yoon Suk-yeol has yet to display the resolution and will to improve ties with China," it reported. Chinese President Jiang also said earlier this month, apparently alluding to South Korea, that those countries that expect Beijing to lose in its rivalry with Washington will, quote, "definitely regret it." Part of the souring ties also has to do with South Korea's stance on Taiwan, which China maintains as part of its territory. According to an interview with South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol, the matter of Taiwan is not simply an issue between China and Taiwan, but a global one. In response, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Wang Wenbin said the South Korean president was meddling in the issue and claimed it's China's role alone to solve the issues of Taiwan. This led South Korea's Ministry of Foreign Affairs to write about the comments that "we have no choice but to point out that his remarks were a serious diplomatic discourtesy that have raised doubts about China's national stature." These sorts of comments and evidence of souring relations have been ongoing and intensifying for at least 6 years, since China opposed the US's deployment of terminal high-altitude area defense systems in South Korea back in 2017. All that being said, while South Korean airlines pulling routes out of China is probably more about good business sense for handling poorly performing routes, the moves do have fairly direct diplomatic roots, and have been interpreted, at least on the Chinese side, as having political motives. How do you read the situation? Are Korean Air and Asiana's decisions to pull out of several routes to China more about business or more about diplomacy? What do you think it would take for these routes to return and be successful? Let us know in the comment section, and please subscribe.